Today's episode is brought to you by DeSanto Propane. DeSanto Propane is 4 generations strong as a trustworthy family-owned business with unmatched customer service. Go online at DeSantoPropane.com for more info or call toll-free at 1-800-752-4574. Since 1937, the difference has been DeSanto Propane. From FingerLakes1.com, this is FLX Today. We are getting a preview of the upcoming mayoral primary in the city of Geneva today. Jan Regan is one of the 2 candidates who will face off later this month to see who represents Democrats in November. Regan is challenging incumbent Steve Valentino for the Democratic nod, who we hope will join us next week for a similar conversation. Be warned, this talk is centered around campaign and platform, so some context for those who may not be locked into local politics. Jan Regan currently represents the 3rd Ward on City Council. She's nearing the end of her term and was given the nod by City Democratic Committee earlier this year to represent them. But democracy rules the day, and incumbent Steve Valentino, the Democrat who was passed on by City Democrats, secured enough signatures to force a primary. Here's the thing, though. Valentino also received the Republican nod. So win, lose, or draw later this month, he will appear on the ballot in November. That said, keep in mind that while we're framing this conversation as a primary preview, there's a very real possibility that the same matchup takes place in the general. So, without further ado, my conversation with 3rd Ward City Councilor and candidate for mayor, Jan Regan. So much to get into. But first, why choose to run for mayor? Why are you running for mayor?
Well, essentially, I'm running for the same reason that I ran for my ward seat 4 years ago, and that is because of the way I feel about this community and this city. I have really enjoyed City Council, despite how disruptive and how uncomfortable it's been at certain times. It does feel like it doesn't have to be that way. I would like to continue to try and move Geneva forward through the council. And it just came down to this is one way to try it. And so I'm going to throw myself into it. And I'm hoping to get the support of Geneva and have a chance to lead the meetings the way I feel things really should be progressing.
Yeah, and to that end, that all comes down to leadership, right? That's why you're pursuing the mayoral seat. So the question there is, what are the kind of fundamental leadership issues that you see playing out in City Council that make you want to run and feel like you can tackle it?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, it was a really difficult 4 years with all that happened to Geneva and the world at large, the pandemic, and then the policing issues that did divide the country and our city as well, et cetera, et cetera. But the division among City Council didn't start at that moment. It didn't start with one meeting. It wasn't like one day everybody was very happy and the next day things just fell apart. This has been a buildup from, really from the beginning, where certain individual counselors didn't feel, it's not one or two, but at moments didn't feel heard or respected. And that can build up into a kind of resentment, really, and just action on council that doesn't make for a productive session, let's say. And the resentments and the, outbursts just kind of escalated. I think Zoom added to that. But the fact that we went from meeting to meeting without things ever being resolved, the fact that we didn't see each other except for formal meetings, really, that were called for such a specific purpose, and just that feeling of not, being heard, I think that's where things really slowly fell apart. And those are the things that I would work to correct. It's not so much my views on things, it's more my ability and hope to get everyone's views heard, and each counselor who is elected in their ward have their voice be part of the conversation.
And how much of that feels like it is a structural problem as opposed to just like a personality problem? Like the personalities can coexist, but we just need to kind of maybe straighten some things up in terms of how we're getting through these meetings?
Yeah, I would say, really, it's mostly structural. I think it's hard to feel passionate about something and have a civil conversation with someone who's passionate from the other side. But that's what needs to happen. And there's things like one good example I'll just throw out there that would help in terms of productivity of council, as well as in terms of having people better get along, would be to have work sessions. We go from formal session where we sit in assigned seats. We never sit next to someone different, and we face an audience, not each other. And we go from meeting like that once a month without really talking to each other as a group, or talking through issues that maybe are emotional for some people, or even if they're not, just to better understand those things. And that's what I would do. At least once a month, I would schedule a work session, not required, but hopefully most people would be able to make most of them. And that opportunity to move an issue forward would be one benefit, but also working with each other in that less formal setting where, you're sitting in a different place, probably at a table facing each other. I mean, that simple thing alone would really do a lot to keep us more in balance. And one more thing is just the accessibility of the mayor to talk with people when disruptions do occur in between meetings. If something really goes wrong, you can't just hope it goes away and the next month get together and, just hope things are smoother, because things do fester if they're not talked out. It's kind of like a family, you got to talk about things.
And to your point, you said, you're mostly through your first term here. And a lot of these sessions tend to turn a bit long, a bit drawn out. I'm sure there's fatigue, especially when you have certain issues that are coming up repeatedly where folks from the community are voicing concerns about certain things over and over and over again. How much of that can be organized or feels like it could be better shaped so that there isn't that nonstop kind of fatigue or feeling like an hour and a half or 2 hours in, we're only a quarter of the way through the agenda? Yeah.
Well, another thing I would like to see happen is committees to address certain issues. I don't really remember that happened at all in our current situation. We did. I was actually involved in getting a new website. That's the only real committee meeting that I can remember meeting regularly, maybe in the very beginning a couple times. But that needs to happen because there are certain people who have expertise who can summarize things and explain things to the rest of the council and help us dive through some of the issues rather than sitting at a formal meeting and, having read your agenda and have a lot of questions to ask the city manager. We should have a better understanding of everything facing us when we get to the meeting than happens quite a bit. So that would be another structural change that I would like to see happen.
When you talk to Democratic voters in the city right now, what are a few of the bigger issues, whether they're longer-term issues or short-term issues? It's really kind of sad to say that so much of it is basic things that we have just discussed right now. The first thing I hear is, that council, I'm sick of the personal insults. I'm sick of the not talking about ideas. And so, to think to get to real issues, you have to cut through that and provide a foundation that allows the discussion to go productively. One other thing that I have heard, people don't realize there's no mayor's office currently in our city hall. So that's an issue of accessibility, and communications is something I hear about a lot from citizens, that they don't know what's going on, or they're reaching out to find out something and they can't seem to get through to either a counselor or staff. And I think even just having a presence in City Hall with hours for the public, that's another, very basic thing here, but that's one thing I would like to establish. And one of the things that we see a theme that we see pop up on social media a lot when it comes to city council or just Geneva city issues in general is kind of marries up property taxes and the rising costs of services and kind of the fine line council's forced to walk between balancing them. When you think about those two things, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening right now who that's their big concern. How much could my property taxes go up if we have to do X, Y, and Z things to maintain the services that we've come to expect? How do you philosophically want to approach that if elected mayor?
Yeah, that is actually, I should have brought that up as another thing that's constantly raised when I talk to people going door to door or just in general. So one thing I would do, and this is again sort of a foundation thing, we all claim to be running on the platform of reducing taxes, which is really critical. But once we're in place and our city manager comes to us and says, so what are your goals? We never just outright say, we want to lower taxes. And I would like that to be a goal, a stated goal, because City Council does have to come up with some ideas to explore, but we have some talented professionals who really know this area, and I think we should be asking them to really put work into that as our goal. But I can give you a couple other really quick ideas. I mean, there is the whole shared services concept with the town in particular, and there's things to explore there that could be helpful without cutting our services to the city. I think efficiencies within departments is important. So when you say shared services, sometimes that could be with organizations in town, supporting them with resources rather than building up a department, so to speak. One place that we actually did make a move on that was DPW. When we hire a DPW staff person, typically they are a more expensive hire because there are union rules, et cetera. But seasonal workers can be hired through BID, Business Improvement District. And last year, or for this year's budget, we did increase the budget for DPW so that they'd be able to hire more people seasonally to help when we need that kind of support. So there's approaches like that you can apply. We have city properties that are owned by the city, obviously, that we should be selling and trying to, I mean, in my dream world, we'll be building affordable housing that would be mixed within the city that would both sell the property and also get a taxpayer in there and address some of the housing issues. So there's a lot of little things, but it's sort of like what I was saying about the foundation of council. Little things can add up, and those would be some of the approaches that I'd like to see happen.
What should the mayor's role or the mayor's office's role be in connecting some of these broader issues? You just brought up housing. That's a county issue, right? As much as Geneva can tackle that, it's primarily a county issue. The county seems to be headed in the direction of doing something with it, but there's concerns about east-west and how that's going to sort of play itself out. What role should the mayor's office play in that from your perspective?
Well, I think communication with the county is key. We are fortunate to have a fairly new city manager. She probably feels like she's been there for a while now, but who has a lot of experience in county administration coming from Tompkins County. So working close with her and with the county to really be sure that the voice of Geneva is heard. I do feel a lot of times county kinds of officials look more to the west than to the east, and we do have to stop that from happening. Even simple things like, in the meantime, addressing transportation to these, when you say housing, a lot of times the food desert concept comes up, or just access to where someone might be employed or where they want to go to buy their resources for their household, and improving transportation to the places that are now housing some of our lower income citizens. Right there, that's another county role, but they're well aware that we house so many of the county's lower income people who may not have the resources to get themselves to where they need to go. So improving transportation would be one intermediate step that kind of addresses some issues of housing. But yeah, it's a challenge. I think that the study is very helpful in getting us, and I have to read it even more closely, but getting us closer to seeing what some of our needs truly are.
Does it concern you at all that it appears, at least broadly, housing is kind of setting up for this gap while the state and some counties are making a push towards creating more low-income housing, that the median is kind of also getting up into this space where some folks locally are just getting priced out? Does it concern you at all from a city perspective that the gap may be getting too wide in there and that the middle will have to be dealt with as well at some point, beyond just, obviously there's a low-income housing access problem, but it also seems like the middle's kind of fallen out too.
Yeah. And I think one thing we're seeing, and the city council is now addressing, is the whole Airbnb or short-term rental concept that, can take over certain neighborhoods pretty easily, especially in Geneva. South Main Street is really filled with Airbnbs and the other short-term rentals. But you're seeing that across the city, really. And that changes the structure of a neighborhood. It changes the price people are willing to pay because they're going to make a lot more money off of that property. So that's something we're addressing from the simple, making sure there's an occupancy tax, as there is at a hotel, of course, that would add to the city budget, but also just figuring out the proper controls to make that that not take over a neighborhood and leave some of these properties for more affordable or middle income housing. We're seeing a lot of them are kind of plans right now, more than actually foundations being put in, but our new project on Lockland Road, for example, and it's not in the city, but in the town. There's a similar project going on at the golf course, Geneva Country Club. And those are very high income. And we're happy to see housing, but I would like to see it spread more. There is a project going on Middle Street, for example, which a couple local developers are doing. And that has some high income housing in like the penthouse kind of place, but it's mixed throughout. And I think that's really out that building. And that's really an approach I'd like to encourage the developers who come to Geneva to take on.
Does a city like Geneva have a greater housing challenge because of the spread of rental properties that exist? You not only have the short-term stuff, but also you've got HWS, you've got the school, which is contributing to that as well. Does that make the challenge, something that needs to be urgently dealt with, but also a little more challenging to fix long term? Yeah,
that's a good way of phrasing it. And interestingly enough, I think it's pretty public that Hobart William Smith is really encouraging, maybe they're actually even insisting that students live on campus now. And so that's going to open up a lot of properties. It would be interesting to see what happens with those, whether they become rentals for citizens and what price point they will be, or whether they'll just dump some money into them and make them into more Airbnbs. So, I think Geneva's in a unique position, and the renters who are renting, who don't have the resources to get into a place that's better maintained, I guess, they're facing a real difficult situation. I'm really happy to say on our slate, our Fifth Ward councilor, Will Wolf, he's a renter, and he's living among many friends who are renters. And I'm just really glad to have his voice with us on our slate to address that, because it's a lot of Geneva. And we need to be looking at how to get landlords more accountable, probably do a better landlord registry kind of system, because it's really important that everyone has a safe place to live and a comfortable place. And, so that's work ahead of us.
Obviously, we're talking about the Democratic primary coming up at the end of the month, but I'm sure you're talking to voters from all walks of life. I'm curious what that cross-section looks like between Republican voters and Democratic voters. what are the issues that both sides are really concerned about? And this is important, I think, an important distinction. Is there more similarity than most people would believe coming in?
Yeah, I think that is the case. At this point, because we're in a Democratic primary, I'm not spending a lot of time talking to Republicans. I have lists of where registered Democrats live, and because we're in a kind of a hurry here for June 27th to come up. That's where we're focusing our attention. But even within the Democratic Party, of course, there's a lot of variation, and I think there are people. The Republican voters in Geneva are expressing, in particular, I think safety rises top of list. Of course, it's a concern for Democrats as well. And you'll notice we don't have anything about a police accountability board on any platform, at least among everyone I've seen of the individuals or myself. Safety, of course, is a huge issue. And we're anxious to meet our new chief and just move forward with there's no plans to force a citizens board on anybody. I think there's a lot of ways to be accountable and accessible, and that's what we would work to see happen.
Yeah. When you look back the last 3.5 years or so, what stands out to you as maybe that one experience that was most beneficial, that present you is grateful for going through this process?
Well, legislatively it was difficult. I have to say, I think because they didn't weigh as heavy at the time, I was very happy to get through a few environmental types of legislation, as well as work hard in the very beginning to open up the Dorn Avenue Geneva Resource Recovery Park is what we've called it. But it kind of, with a change in management out there, has kind of become more of just a composting place. But those were satisfying. But probably most satisfying was contact with citizens, which may sound like a cliche, but I held town hall meetings, and some were widely attended and some were a handful of people. That was a great outreach. I did get a lot of calls, and it was always rewarding to me personally to be able to find the person who could help them. And those were great experiences, and I would try to do that still as mayor. People reach out to me to do all I could to get them the support they're looking for.
And we touched on it a little bit earlier, but really your message for those folks who have read the stories in the newspaper, read the stories on Finger Lakes One about city council, marred in this, stuck on that, issues, not getting this, that, or whatever done. For those who feel that frustration, that progress isn't happening, what's your message to those voters in this primary?
I would say, give us a chance. We're looking to restructure things so that you have a foundation for progress between getting along better and just meeting more frequently to address the issues, having committees look at issues individually, and just working hard to create the kind of place where we can actually make some progress in the city and move forward. It was frustrating. Anything that we did accomplish once, the group that kind of moved things in that direction, once the majority was lost, the others then worked to get rid of everything we had done. And that's where we are now, kind of at ground zero. So a good place to start, but it's got to become a drive towards progress.
It's an opportunity.
Yeah.
We're about 2 weeks away from the primary. Where can folks learn more about your campaign or just reach out to you with a question?
Yeah, I have little business cards. I do have a Facebook page. I'm going door to door. You can also look at the Geneva Democrats Facebook page. And, there's stories here and there in the newspaper to look up. It's a very confusing scenario for citizens who haven't followed it the way candidates or the parties have. But if you have one more minute, I'd love to just explain briefly what the way we're seeing this, so the what we're seeing is 4 candidates who are challenging for a Democratic primary, and that is just fine. I think everybody who primaries is kind of brave. They weren't the candidate that was picked, but good for them for wanting to be a choice on the ballot. The issue here is that they're already a choice on the ballot. These 4 individuals, these 4 candidates, are registered Democrats, but they were endorsed by the Republican Party. So before this primary took place, they're already on the ballot. In other words, in those slots, in those different positions, mayor and one of the at-large positions and the 4th and 5th ward, those individuals would be the only candidate left on the ballot in November on the Republican and Democratic line. Now, that's probably confusing enough, but just to clarify, because what we hear back is that's disingenuous because we are on the ballot. We did do, as really it's kind of a backstop, I would say. We did put together an independent party with a great deal of effort, I would say also, and that will be on there. But anyone who looks at these ballots will see it's on there, but it's way down there, and it's not what people go to, generally when they're looking to place their vote, and they've got a little kid at their feet, or they've got to get home. You look at the Democratic and the Republican Party, and if we hadn't done that work, we wouldn't have that extra line in there. But we really want to see a choice on both of the major parties, and that's another reason to make sure you get out and vote to keep that the way really it should be. 2 names listed under the parties, so that there's a true choice for Republicans and independents come November.
All right, Jan Regan, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
That'll do it for this edition of Finger Lakes Today. If you'd like to see more conversations like this one, check out the show on your favorite podcast platform or subscribe to the fingerlakes1.com YouTube channel. Have a great day, and we will see you next time.